Okay. Thank you, Mr. Faison. It is 6:02, and we are going to call our meeting to order. Dr. Thomas, if you would conduct roll call for us.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Davis,
Here.
Mr. Stevens,
Here.
Ms. Davis,
Here.
Yeager,
Here. Here.
I'm sorry, Dr. Dykeman,
Here.
Mr. Worthy,
Here.
Dr. Gant,
Here.
Dr. Knox,
Here.
and Dr. Maddox.
Here.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. So we do have a quorum. We will move forward with item number 2 on our agenda, 2.1, which is to amend or adopt the agenda. The floor is open.
I move to adopt the agenda.
I second.
Okay. That was Dr. Maddox with the motion to adopt the agenda and Mr. Davis with the second. Are there any questions or discussion regarding that motion? Okay, Dr. Thomas, if you would take roll for all in favor of adopting the agenda as listed before us.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens, Mr. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Davis,
Yes.
Dr. Yeager,
Yes.
Dr. Dykeman,
Yes.
Mr. Worthy,
Yes.
Dr. Gant,
Yes.
Dr. Knox,
Yes.
and Dr. Maddox.
Yes.
Thank you. That motion passes. Our agenda is listed before us. To give just a brief review of why we are here, we are trying to complete the work that we've been doing for really the past several months in preparation for our cognitive visit. And so based on the report that we have and based on the progress we've made, we wanted to use this session to work on areas that still need work. And so if you look at item 3, the cognitive discussion, those are some of the areas that we still need to talk about a little bit more or make a decision, just come to a general consensus around how we'll move forward. I think Mr. Barlament is here with us as well. He provided an update on where we were. And so with each of these, I can share with you, and you can also see just in the report as well, where we are and what needs to be done. And so we'll start with item 3.1. And just so we can use our time effectively, I'm going to ask that we try to, particularly under these items, under number 3, that we try to come to some consensus or figuring out how we're going to move forward or next steps within about 20 minutes or so. Because I think we've had a chance to read through the report several times. And if there is any additional conversation that needs to happen outside of that, we can continue these conversations. But I think we should be able to get through these items with just some general guidelines as it relates to time. So if you take a look, Lisa, I'm going to
stop sharing. Do you want to share your screen?
Or do you have access to the document that the document with the cognitive progress? I can share my screen as well.
Is it this one?
Yep.
Okay, mine might be a little slow. My internet's really slow today, so there might be a little delay, just so you know.
Okay, I'm happy to pull it up on my end as well. And I think board members have access to this, or maybe not to edit, but to view, if I'm not mistaken.
Let's see. I'll let you share your screen. You might have something different than I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let me come back. Let's see. All right. Give me 1 second. Okay. Okay. Is everyone able to see? It says a cognitive progress report template.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And so under item 3.1, this relates to gathering stakeholder data. And so that deals with standard 1.4. So I'll take us there. 1.4 Directive 5. And again, you can also reference the report, but Mr. Barlament sort of synthesized all of this for us. So Directive 5 says we need to establish a means to routinely gather, analyze, and use stakeholder perception data on the effectiveness of the board, basically of our governance, to support continuous improvement. What we need to discuss is how we plan on doing that, how we want to move forward with doing that. I sent an email maybe a week or two ago that sort of outlined the options as I understood them, working through GSBA, creating our own template that aligns with our self-assessment, and then also, or doing that through the Cognia platform. And so I wanted to put that out there so we can discuss it and figure out how we're going to move forward. So the floor is open for discussion. Mr. Barlament, am I missing anything? Or Dr. Thomas or Dr. Maddox?
No, I don't.
I don't think so. No, ma'am.
Okay. So the floor is open. We should talk about and have a general consensus on how we're going to move forward with gathering this data.
And this is a long-term plan, right? This is not just an instantaneous once only kind of thing.
That's right. And Dr. Yeager, let me say this because, and we'll get to this later, we're also going to look at our self-assessment. But you'll notice that our self-assessment really overlaps with the directives, which I think is a good thing, which means we're working on some things. We saw some of the same things, but it also mentions it there as well. I think maybe under community relations under that domain. But to your question, yes, whatever we establish needs to be sustainable. It needs to be ongoing so that we're not just gathering feedback this one time.
So something kind of accidentally happened in the last week or so. Someone in the community referred to some work that Mr. Stevens and I were doing as part of a community relations committee. And I was like, we don't have a community relations committee. Maybe we should have a community relations committee. And it was just kind of a slip, and he didn't really mean it that way, but he came up with this idea. And I thought, well, that's a brilliant solution. We have a government relations committee. Why do we not have a community relations committee that serves the purpose of communicating between the board and the community? Now, of course, within all of the guidelines that we've just discussed among our norms, et cetera. But it seems to me that it would certainly serve a purpose of building trust and building relationships. Before we just keep going out and surveying our community, we really need to get to know them a little bit better, it feels like. So this would be a long-term investment, not an instantaneous solution, of course, but it did seem to me that it might serve part of the role. It wasn't one of the options that you mentioned, but I would put that forward as a possible solution, one of several.
And I don't know if you can, I'm sorry, did you finish, Dr. Yeager?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My suggestion is, I don't really know what the platforms are offering when you say GSBA. Are they offering a service of doing anonymous surveys, or are they expecting the district to come up with the list of people that we want this opinion from? Our experience has been, we build these community input, I'll call them nodules, around things like giving feedback on the strategic plan, and that's where you select community members that you want to evaluate or participate in building that plan. The other possibility would be around big decisions like going to a career academy. That was a community input discussion along with the administration to come up with, you know, those particulars around that and how we move forward with our charter system. I don't know what the intent was in this for GSBA, other than to give the community a different opportunity. So I'm not really sure if we're talking about an anonymous survey that is performed by people who aren't, have no skin in the game, to say, if you will, who just simply want to get the pulse of the community. And if that's the case, that's done by opinion polls, I would imagine, is what we're talking about. And there are companies that do that as well. So I don't know what GSBA offers, nor do I know what Cognia offers. But if that's the kind of survey that they're talking about, then I think one other question that we might have is it going to be from Cognia or GSBA, who are intimately involved with the school system, or do you really want an outside opinion to evaluate this? Because I think they would phrase the questions a lot differently. That's the question. Are we trying to get the pulse of the community to speak specifically to this board and this district's performance over some period of time? Or are we trying to get the pulse of the community to speak to what they want in a board and performance over time? And I think it matters who we choose under those circumstances.
I like to,
Mr. Worthy, let me address Ms. Davis's question. I think it's the goal of this is actually to get the community's pulse on the functioning of the board. Inherent in that will probably be like some things that they want, but really to assess how effective our functioning is as a board in relation to the domains. Okay, the domains that we should be operating within.
So are they asking for an anonymous survey, or is it going, again, it just, to me, it matters if they're, how they're going to do this. Who gives the criteria for the survey?
Cognia is not asking, they have not determined that this has to be anonymous or not. That is our job. Their directive was to establish a means to routinely gather, analyze, and use stakeholder perception data. In the email that I sent out, I think I shared that with the GSBA service, the email would still come from the district. They more so help like facilitate the process. They help us develop the survey. And then we decide how we want to move forward. If we want to move forward just with the focus group, or if we want to do the focus group and then the community as a whole. So a lot of this is, some of this is up to us. That we have to establish a way to gather data, and to do that, that's not a choice. So that's not optional.
So
yes, I wanted to respond to what Patricia said a few minutes ago in terms of a community relations committee. That same person contacted me, and what happened there, Patricia, the person got really confused. He was using saying the wrong thing, a community relations committee. And when he said that to me, I said, I don't know what you're talking about. We don't have anything of that sort. And he mentioned I said, okay, but let me just cut through the chase. I said, okay, we have he said, I thought you had a committee with CO something. So, oh, you talking about the COC committee. That's the Community Oversight Committee. That committee was organized way back in 1990, I believe it was, or 91, when the first SPLOST passed, which I totally agree with it because of the fact that you have members from the community, you have a board member on that committee, and they're overseeing SPLOST funds. So I got him corrected on that, Patricia. That's what that person was talking about. Now, as far as establishing a community relations committee, well, you can look into it, but I do know this, and perhaps you can check with some people at GSBA. Boards around this state, they are actually doing away with committees, period, all committees. So before we jump out and do something of that sort, we need to do some checking on that or some research on that.
And I want to go back to again, another task being put on the district that's going to consume resources to manage a survey of the community or a survey. And when I said anonymously, by that I meant we're not handpicking people to ask the question of, that this survey would be broadcast to the community and it would come back in to whoever sent out the survey, but we didn't choose who would get it. It would be done by some company that knows how to randomly pick people to get a cross-section of opinions from different people with different perspectives, I would expect. And so that's what I think a professional survey company would do. And that would be my number one recommendation, whether that's GSBA or whether it is Cognate or some other company that does, we call them customer satisfaction measurements. But again, there's a whole industry out there to support that. And if this is something we're going to do long term, I think it would be very important to try and make this as neutral in terms of the responses we possibly can, and make sure that we're hitting a great cross section of the community, not just people that are directly connected to the school system. I think that's very different kind of survey. That to me would not be an anonymous survey. That's where we're surveying not only our key stakeholders, but they are also our customers. And so that's what I want to understand. Is this cross section, or is it specific to people who have children in the school system?
I want to speak to surveys. And when you look at a survey, sometimes it could work, and sometimes surveys not going to tell you everything that you need to know. And I'm thinking that it wouldn't for this particular what we are discussing here. And I'm thinking, in terms of data. Well, of course, we have an open mic when people come and speak at the regular board meetings, and also since we're doing Zoom now, they send letters expressing their views on various things. They send emails, etc. And I do know when they now they're sending letters because we aren't meeting face to face. But when they speak with the open mic there, I think it's in that statement that is read. If you have any further questions, etc., then you send those questions or contact the superintendent or the president of the board. Now, that's just one way that I feel like that it's working. What I'm saying, before we jump and do something of a survey or any other type of instrument or whatever it may be, we need to take a look at what we're doing now and see whether it's working.
Dr. Gant, can I say something?
Sure.
Yeah,
and I can't see everyone in my view. I can only see a few people. So
if I can go back, I mean, I think we're having a good discussion here, but I'm kind of focused on, the particular of the type of gathering stakeholder data that is being talked about by Cognia. And in the description of the report, of the Cognia report that led to the recommendation that we gather stakeholder data, they were talking about specifically how our meetings were conducted.
Yes.
And I feel like that, I mean, we can certainly expand it at some point in terms of, well, how do parents look at the entire school district? How do the entire staff look at leadership of you know, with the school board? I mean, I think there's a lot of directions you could go to, but I'm trying to kind of hone in to why this recommendation was being made by Cognia, and it all dealt with those who were attending our meetings or watching our meetings through video, and those seem to be the ones that they got the comments where they said that the board operated in a way that was embarrassing, sad, and scary. And so I'm trying to focus. I would like to see our discussion focus exactly on how do we take the temperature of how we are seen publicly as a body during the course of our public decision-making process.
Greg, if I may, what you said a few minutes ago in terms of the directive from Cognia, this is the way that I perceived it, that the way board meetings were being conducted. Because when you look at a Board of Education meeting, this is a business meeting that is taking place discussing the business of the school district and what, $164 million budget, et cetera. And it needs to be conducted in a professional manner. And from what Cognia said, that was not taking place. So what I'm saying, I think that if we discuss and come up with, and I think perhaps we already have covered some things, clean up our board meetings. And one of the things that they stressed that it's very important that you use Robert's Rules of Order. And if you do that, it's no doubt that the board meetings would be better.
Okay, if I can go one step further and just offer a suggestion, and then I will move on if people don't want to talk about it. But if we had a vehicle, it could be it could be something that is actually in the back of the room. It could be in the back of the agenda, a board agenda, where those who are in attendance could rate, you know, was attending this meeting, was it helpful? Was in other words, I won't go into the pieces of now, but where on the back of it there was like an evaluation form, just like we have when we go to workshops, and they can just leave that anonymously at you know, at the back of the room, or give it to the security officer or whatever. And if we had something similar to those who were observing the meeting online, then we would get, you know, and we would be looking for not just how we interact with each other, but were the issues clearly defined? Could they follow the discussion? You know, in other words, whatever took place at that meeting, did they find it meaningful? Did the discussion, did they think that you know, basically evaluating us just like you would workshop leaders. And if we look at it, and I'm not disagreeing with what anybody else has said about a larger evaluation process, but in terms of the Cognia report, that's what they were focusing on. And yeah, or
I don't think the Cognia report, and maybe Mr. Barlament, you can speak a little bit more to this. I know we've discussed it some. I think the cognitive report, and as it relates to this directive, it is related to our continuous improvement overall as a governance team. I don't think it's specifically or exclusively referring to our meetings. I think it's our operations within all of the domains in which we should be operating. So finances, with how we go about policy development. I mean, all of those areas, meetings is one out of 8 domains. And so I don't, I did not interpret it that way, but I understand that we all will have different interpretations. But I just want to be sure that whatever we do, we're not missing an aspect that we should be assessing.
I'm going to ask a question here with the norms that we have crafted, especially with the meetings, and we went through those. It took a while to go through them, but anyway, the question I want to ask: do you think that do you think that some of the things that we discussed and included in the norms, especially, and I'm talking exclusively now about meetings, do you think that would improve the meetings if they are followed? Do you think the norms pertaining to meeting would improve the meetings?
Was that a general question for the board, Mr. Worthy, or for me?
Oh no, that's for anybody. That's
Okay.
for the.
I think the point of discussion is that we need a way to evaluate what the community thinks of our meetings. We can keep trying to make our meetings better, and we are doing that. I think our meetings are much better, but we still need a mechanism, according to Cognia, for evaluating the stakeholders' impressions. So that's a separate issue, it seems to me.
And again, I don't think it's just the meetings. I think it's overall governance. Meetings are one part of that, but then policy with, our financial management, all of those domains under which or within which we operate.
So in response,
Patricia mentioned a mechanism to evaluate. That's why I mentioned the norms. If you follow those norms, and then of course at this point we can go back to something we didn't put in there that we should have put in there. If you follow those norms, I really believe that would be a way to evaluate that, hey, our meetings are conducted in a professional manner. We follow Robert's Rules of Order. I can't recall everything because I wrote most of those norms. But if you follow those norms, that may be a mechanism to evaluate that, yes, our meetings are held in a professional manner.
If I may interject, just my experience has been, we have always wanted to seek community input on the leadership of the district and the performance of the district overall, especially as it related to the superintendent. And we wanted to get stakeholders' input on that. And so that's why I'm saying, and I'm in total agreement with Dr. Gant on this, because this is bigger than just our meetings. This is an ongoing thing or a mechanism for gathering feedback from our stakeholders, all of them in the community with kids or kids not in the school, our partners, everybody that has a vested interest in the school district and the education of the children in Clark County. What method would be useful or be valuable, more than useful, valuable for us to gauge where we are in meeting the expectations of this community? And that's all this is. I think that's what this survey has to be about. I think it has to be more encompassing. And that's why I'm saying, is it something that you hire out to somebody and have them do that survey, however they choose to do that survey, and then provide continuous feedback to us either on a quarterly basis or on a semi-annual basis, to always have a gauge out there or something to check the temperature of this community as we are meeting the needs of educating all of our children. And I know from experience, and in my own company, I have a person who does this type of thing in the banking industry. And if we're talking about surveys that we send out anonymously so that we receive the feedback, we target what zip codes and things like that you want to send the surveys to, and what you can pick those areas. But our success rate or our response rate is expected to be somewhere between 9 and 10%. And so even when we get this survey back from that type of inquiry, know that only people that really care are going to be responding to that. And so that's the story as it goes. And so again, unless we're going to increase capacity in our administrative staff to do surveying, then I would suggest that we do that due diligence to find out what the cost is to have it done outside of that, so that they can stay, they need the information, but I think that we don't want to pull them in a different direction now, in addition to all of the other things that we're dealing with.
Okay, I'm gonna make.
I think, Dr. Yeager, I think you were saying something, and then Mr. Davis, and then I would like to hear from anybody else that would like to say something that hasn't said something, so we can move the conversation towards a solution.
Thank you. I was just going to say, I hate to see money spent on the board. This is hard fought money we need to be spending on the kids. We should create a committee to evaluate ourselves. We don't need to be spending a huge amount of money. Dr. Anderson says they do this in her college and it's a huge amount of expense. Can we not just create a separate committee charged with this, as John mentioned, to do this, create a survey and do the work and have the meetings and do the outreach that we need to get the feedback. We don't have to have some big corporate thing come in and cost a ton of money, because this is not helping the kids, I don't think.
I think I listed an estimated price for GSBA, but I have not included anything, any other pricing things, because I didn't have those options. Greg?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, we do have school climate evaluations that include, you know, parents and students. And for the vast majority of folks who interact with the school district, they do it on the school level. And and this is the last time I'll say that, but if you look at the entire section that led to this recommendation, it was all based on our meetings and the perception that those who followed our meetings and either video or live, that we set the pace for the district, and so we can end up where we can be acting foolishly as board members, and still people who don't interact with the school board and don't really pay any attention to us, but simply interact with their schools, which is what most people do. They will say, yeah, I like my school, and so therefore I like the school district, but it doesn't address any bad behaviors of board members, unless those who come and witness our meetings. And that's why I you know, again, I just point to, we've got 2 full pages talking about in the Cognitive report about how we conducted ourselves at meetings. And I think Cognitive wants us to see, well, how not only do you have norms to so that you will behave better, but how are you evaluating whether or not you're behaving better? So anyway, that would be the end of it. I made my point twice, so that's, thank you.
Others that we haven't heard from?
I just had 2 quick things that I wanted to say. And one is just in reference to what Greg was just saying. And I do think that the meetings are a part of it. And I think that his idea of having a survey that people can fill it out after they leave the meeting, I think that that could work too. And then that could just be part of it. And then maybe there's other things and other ways we need to be evaluated in addition to meetings. And then the other thing I was going to ask is, do we have or do we know of any other districts, or can we get the information on if other districts do this sort of thing and how they do it, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel? I agree both with Dr. Yeager and Ms. Davis. I think Ms. Davis saying that it would be good to have it done in a way that is sort of outside of the district and unbiased and people who know what they're doing. But at the same time, I agree that we don't want to spend a ton of money on it. So if there are other districts already doing this sort of thing and we can get an example, that might be helpful.
Can you hear me? Can you all hear me? Yes, I think in the email that I sent, there was one school district that was referenced that had, as an example, so certainly not the only school district that had used the GSBA services, but it could, I guess to you all's point, if someone wants to reach out to a couple of other districts to see how they go about doing this, I don't want us to get lost and make this too complicated. To be honest, we have to just figure out how to assess our governance from people outside of us. And the money we spend on that is going to be up to us. But I don't think it has to be a complicated decision. We just need to have an idea of where we're moving. And so if we want to gather some information from other districts, if someone would agree to do that, that would be fine. If we, whatever the board thinks, but I don't think we have to, I don't think it has to be too complicated.
I have an idea now. We have
Mr. Worthy,
180.
Mr. Worthy, can you hold on one second? I think, was there
Sure.
anybody else that wanted to speak that has not spoken?
I just wanted to say, I understand what they're saying about the money issue, but I believe that, it's not a bad thing to get an expert to get us started, to help us this, first time around, sit down and guide us on what it is that we possibly should be surveying and how to get it done. And then after this year, it would be a one-time expense, and we're probably training to do it well in the future. Versus us adding more to our plate of trying to figure this out. But I don't see, the harm in this one-time support from any of the organizations that were named, COTNIA or GSBA.
All right, thank you, Dr. Maddox. Other thoughts from people who have not shared already? Mr. Worthy?
Yes, I said that I have an idea because 16 years that I've served on this board, and what I'm getting ready to say, it may be true and it may not be true, but I don't ever recall any school districts around this country, also from the state of Georgia, had developed any type of evaluation instrument in terms of how we are doing. Now, having said that, the idea that I have, and I can think of 4 school districts that have gone through what we're going through now. Of course, 3 of them went through something much difficult because they got stripped of their accreditation. But anyway, if someone can reach out to Clayton County, DeKalb County, Dooley County, that's way south Georgia, and Warren County. They've been through this. Now, perhaps they develop some type of instrument to evaluate themselves. I have the stakeholders to evaluate them, to ask how we are doing. Now, that's my idea.
Okay.
So I just noted in the chat that your GSBA was $1,500. That seems appropriate. That's about the scale I would be willing to
That
do.
$1,500 includes some staff, and I thought the way you explained it, it sounded like they would be working with staff to develop this. And I'm trying to keep that work out of the administration, but that's not my call. That's the superintendent's call. So there you go.
But maybe they could work with board members.
And I'm always
And that was an
supportive.
estimate. That was an estimate based on our general conversation. Of course, you know, if we decide to go that way or with another company or entity, either way, again, with them, the email, the survey comes from the district, but they help us sort of frame the survey, build the survey, the questions, and help us, well, we determine how we want to go about doing it. If we only want to use a focus group. And from my understanding, the focus groups could be who we determine them to be. So if that's parent advisory board, if that's a group of LSUTs, if it's an assembly of people from different stakeholder groups that we put together, if we decide to do that, or if we decide to do that and just send it out to everyone in the community. I think it is a bit more collaborative. So we work alongside with GSBA from my understanding. But again, that's only GSBA. I didn't, there may be other, I know there have been some other places that have been mentioned as well.
Yeah.
We did speak with Cognia to see if they had a resource, and what they offered was a tool, but we would have to do all of the development and dissemination or administration of the survey.
And so we would still build the tool. It would just be through their platform, from
Right,
my
yes.
understanding, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, so let me recap what I've heard to move us along. We have the idea of establishing a community relations committee. We have the idea of trying to gather ongoing feedback after our meetings. And then we have the idea of reaching out to an outside person or agency. Again, that can be GSBA or someone else to help us facilitate this whole process, to help us develop the survey and then guide us with administering the survey. I don't necessarily see these as mutually exclusive. I think this is a little bit of what Dr. Dykeman mentioned earlier, that even if we move forward with contacting an outside agency to help, we can still continue to think of other ways. I see this as a starting point for us. And so we can, you know, we might decide to, as we're working, to provide the survey to people that attend our meetings as well. And so I think we might be able to incorporate some of these. We can, of course, always still reach out to other districts as well while we're doing this work to really inform us as we move forward. But I'm just trying to get a general consensus of how we move forward. Mr. Barlament, is Mr. Barlament still on the call, Dr. Thomas?
Yes, he's here, and he had been trying to speak earlier. I've been texting with him, but we couldn't hear him. Mr. Barlament, let's see what he's saying. Are you able to speak now, James? He's here because he's commenting about everything we're saying.
Okay, and see, I can't see the comments, but I'm curious, like, does he have any?
He's here.
There Hello.
Okay.
I thought that just unmuting my phone would unmute the mic, but apparently you have to push *6. I just wanted to say, and I'm mostly just listening tonight, but I wanted to say that I think all of you have, good ideas about how to collect feedback. I think what Cognia is asking for is that real stakeholder survey that would be sent out to all stakeholders in our community. I think that there have been some interesting ideas thrown around about crowdsourcing opinions of board meetings. I think that's an interesting idea. I think forming a community relations committee would be an interesting step as well. And, we can formalize all of this discussion in the Cognia report. So yeah, I'm mostly just listening in on the conversation, but I think the thrust of what Cognia is asking for is a survey of stakeholders on the board's effectiveness, and that would include a number of different areas, not just the effectiveness of the meetings, but the effectiveness as the board in all areas.
You still there, James?
Yeah, that's all I got for now.
Okay, thank you. So any suggestions as far as how we bring all of this together?
Just based on what James said and what other people have said as well, I feel like having someone like GSBA help create the survey would be really helpful, because first of all, I don't think that we as a board should create the survey, because creating a survey is a whole thing in itself where it doesn't work as well if you don't have expertise in it. So I think that having somebody help us do that would be really useful. And I think GSBA in particular, or just someone who's really familiar with the domains of school board governance, so that they could tailor the questions in a way that would get the people who are answering the survey to focus on the important things to focus on in terms of governance, so that we don't just get a bunch of people kind of just saying what they like or don't like about the board. I think it's important that it be tailored to the particular domains. So either GSBA or Cognia or some organization that has school board knowledge, I think would be helpful.
That's very well stated.
Okay. I think I heard Mr. Worthy. I just saw Dr. Yeager. Is there a general agreement that we can move forward? Mr. Davis, Dr. Knox. Okay. So I guess what I will do is, my next step is I'll reach out to GSBA and just see how we go about getting the process started and more details about the process. I shared with you everything that I gathered from our conversation. But it may be that, you know, we have to have an additional conversation, or I may need one person to work directly with GSBA to help. Certainly is going to be a collaborative effort. And so I don't think they're just going to go off and create the survey, but they want to, you know, create it within the domains. And so maybe stay tuned if that's the general direction we want to go in. And as it relates to the committee, the Community Relations Committee, if I may suggest, we sort of keep that on our radar, particularly if we end up having a retreat, which hopefully we will, in either December or January, where we can, you know, discuss the committee more, because I think that's not the only committee that's been brought. I want to say, Dr. Dykeman, maybe several months ago, I can't remember the name, but there was like a data committee or a diversity committee.
Yeah, I was thinking of having a student achievement or sort of academic performance committee, and then a behavior discipline committee to look at the data for that.
And so does that sound, that's where we'll move forward with that. Is that okay? Let's see. Dr. Yeager.
Do you want us to bring the policy on committees to the floor and discuss adding those committees before Cognia's visit? Because that would require some urgency at this point. We would want to discuss it at the work session.
I don't think it'll be an efficient use right now of our time to try to create a committee. That's an opinion of 1 of 9. Partially because, because of time, but then secondly, when we get into standard 1.7, it also has some recommendations as it relates to our committee. that I think we need to tighten up. And so those are my thoughts. I don't think so. But the floor is open for others to share their thoughts.
So my question would be, could you maybe create an ad hoc committee to respond to the things that you're talking about now? Because until we get this focus, so that, you know, if someone runs into a problem with, if you contact GSBA and they say, well, you know what, that's not what we really do. What we do is we will bring in people to facilitate, you know, asking you the questions that you want to get answered. Well, that's not bringing us the expertise. That's bringing us great facilitation. If they don't have experience and expertise in developing surveys so that we get unbiased information, then I'm suggesting that maybe we look a little bit further for that. And I think that, I think I've said this before, that maybe Dr. Bagwell, who does all of the surveys around the community data, she might be able to point us in a direction that would help us, you know, make a better decision about this. So is there perhaps an ad hoc committee opportunity here to pursue bringing a recommendation back to the full board on how we approach this?
Yeah, I agree, Linda. That would not require a change to policy. We have ad hoc committees in our policy already. So you could create an ad hoc committee without having to create a new committee formally.
But it would also center that conversation on people who are just laser focused on getting this survey done and done efficiently and effectively. And I don't think we have to, well, and again, I'm not saying that the administration doesn't have a role here, because I think that you have a very critical role, but it doesn't put the burden on them to have to try and find a solution for this.
I agree.
Well, okay, I want to chime in here because I'm going back to what Carol Dyckman said a few minutes ago. Now, you need to have a person that have knowledge of boards of education. Now, the person that you mentioned, Linda, if they have knowledge of what boards are all about, the role of a board member, et cetera, and whatnot, I'll go along with that. If not, we don't need to just reach out to anybody to do this. They need to have knowledge of boards of education, because see, that's a problem in every community, that stakeholders, they don't know the role of board members. You know, they don't know that. So in developing this survey, have a person that is very knowledgeable of boards of education.
In my experience, any reputable company is going to not develop a survey without the board's input and their direction. Actually, that's the whole purpose of them being the people who know how to data gather. They don't know what data to gather until you define that for them. And so I think that's going to be great if we go with someone who's experienced in collecting this kind of information. It would definitely include knowledge of the board and the school district and the stakeholder group.
Okay, so what I hear right now is that generally there's a consensus that we need to inquire, we need to ask someone outside of us. Now, whether that be GSBA or not, I do want to be honest, I'm not excited about creating another committee. Again, I don't think that we need to, I think this is something one person could ask these questions and bring it back to us. But again, I'm not the decision maker. It's us in general. And so far, the only consensus that I think I hear is that we want to ask someone outside of the board to do this. Now, whether that's GSBA or if we want to ask other people, that I think I heard when Dr. Dyckman said GSBA that there was general agreement. I
was just going to say, Lakeisha,
yeah, I had stated that before her. Yeah, I said the same way. I had stated that GSBA, if the amount of money that they're charging, $1,500, and they work with other school districts in doing this. So I don't really believe we need another committee to do this. But so, I mean, I'm thinking we may have two opinions on the table. We might need to, you know, I don't know, we need to vote or what, but I think we're causing more work for ourselves. And I'm just getting nervous with all that we have going on, and with each of these processes, it looked like we take about 5 more steps. And we already have an organization, you know, that works with the school district in doing this kind of thing. So I guess I just don't agree with that, but I would like to hear from everyone. Like, you know, we have 2 options. I would like to kind of know, you like the first option of going with GSBA, or do you like the option of having an ad hoc? Like, I would like that to be more clear.
I would, can I make a recommendation for GSBA, or is that inappropriate, Lakeisha?
Well, I don't think we have action under this,
Okay.
Ms. Palmer. I don't think, but I just want to get a general, just people's general thoughts, and I can tell where we're leaning.
My final word on this is I think it would be awesome to have a board member and James Barliman reach out to GSBA, evaluate what they can bring to us if that meets our needs in terms of resources, and I mean human as well as capital resources, then that's it, it's done. If that is not, then that same ad hoc committee would then look for other resources that could meet our needs for this requirement from Cognia.
Any others?
Can we get some type of consensus? I don't know. I mean,
Well, what I hear, Mr. Davis, is based on what Dr. Dykeman and Dr. Maddox mentioned, I do think that there is general consensus for moving forward with GSBA. I am open to, Mr. Barliman has been a wonderful, resource. And so that person does not have to be me. I've shared with you everything I've learned from GSBA from my conversation with them. I did have a conversation with Mr. Pauly and shared all of the information I gathered during that time. But I'm more than happy for someone to pick up those conversations with him. But I do think we need to move quickly on this, and we just need to decide. So based on what I've heard and what Dr. Maddox has asked as a final sort of assessment of the pulse of the board, I think moving forward with GSBA right now would be the next step. And certainly if anything along those conversations come back to us and it's like, whoa, this is not going to work, of course that information will be shared with the board. But something to keep in mind is that, again, this is a first step. This is not the only step. And
That's
so
right.
This is something that we want to build. And so we can easily layer all of these other ideas that we want to have as we go throughout the year, but we just have to start somewhere.
and it seems like James would be an appropriate person to do this. So I'm.
And so Mr. Barliman, myself, I think Dr. Maddox and Ms. Palmer, I'm trying to remember, we meet generally every other week to sort of talk through Cognia stuff. And so I can't speak for Mr. Barliman, but I do know that he's aware, of this update and where we are. All right, so.
And I want to be sure that I'm not asking to take, make assignments for your staff, Dr. Thomas. Just a suggestion. Thank you.
No problem. And actually, Mr. Barliman and I were talking now that we actually are kind of already operating in an ad hoc kind of way with the work we're doing with Dr. Gant right now. So that it wouldn't be additional work.
Thank you.
Okay, well, if all minds and all hearts and minds are clear, we're going to move forward. Is that okay? It is 7. We have 2 other areas. The item number 2, the second item, so 3.2, is finalizing our behavioral productivity objectives. And I do recognize that we may not come to a resolution on this tonight, but I did want to, I wanted us to have a look at the survey, at the action items that have been created so far, so that we have a general idea of what the what those objectives and So and if you go to standard 1.5, I just switched over. So standard 1.5 directive 3, it says create and document behavioral and or productivity objectives, strategies, actions, and evaluation measures based on the results of the board self-study. So we've spent the past week or two going back, like compiling our notes, meeting with GSBA, but also listening, going back and listening to our self-assessment and just pulling out the themes as well as the action items. And so what you see, let's see, I'll see if I can switch over, but you all may also have this pulled up. What you see here is you should be able to see our evaluation. So the self-assessment.
Don't see anything.
And so here you see, this is just all of our self-evaluation. These are the domains, and we've already responded to these particular domains. But then there's an area that says review comments, and then an area for action steps. And so in the review comments, we basically like synthesize the stuff that we heard, like the themes, and tried to give a general sense of what was discussed. And then we created action steps based on those conversations, based on what needs to, what the board thought needed to happen. Also what GSBA thought needed to happen within those conversations. And so I wanted you all to see this because this is where those strategies, the objectives and the evaluation, this is what it's related to. And this is what we will need to, show, not just this, but what are the concrete steps we're taking. And we have the action steps. So, and Mr. Barlament, if you could jump in, because I know this was, these were conversations that we sort of went round and round about, and I put us on a totally different tangent because of my understanding. But if I'm not mistaken, these action steps can be considered the actions that we'll take. And then the general goals would be like improvement in, let's just say for this particular domain, improving the governance structure. That would be the general goal. And then these would be the action steps as far as how we'll move forward. I'm sorry, improving governance structure would be considered our, I think our objectives. And then maybe these action steps would be the actions that we're gonna take.
Right, so they're asking for objectives and strategies or actions. And that's basically what you're speaking to, Dr. Gant. So yes, this information that you guys are talking about is very important for the third directive under Leadership Standard 1.5. That's basically the work there. So this is definitely a huge step.
And so if you're able to go in and see this, again, it still may be some tweaking. So like if you've gone back or if you've listened or if you look at this and you're like, well, my note said this, like, please let us know. I can go back in and add that and then we can republish it and let the board see it. But most importantly, these would be, this is what that directive references. Now, Mr. Barlament, are there any other things that we need to actually create, any other processes that we need to create based on that directive? I think that's the piece I'm still a little bit uncertain about.
There's one more step really here, and we can work on this as we go, and we're leading up towards the visit. You're talking about the objectives, you're talking about your strategies or actions towards accomplishing those objectives. And I'm unfortunately not able to see what you're showing, Dr. Gant, but evaluation measures is really what needs to be in these as well. So some way to evaluate whether you've been successful or not. And that can obviously take on many forms. Evaluation could be tied to your own self-assessment, which I would recommend because, these objectives and strategies are coming out of your self-assessment. So, the recommendation from Cogni is to do a self-assessment on a regular basis, at least twice a year. So if you're thinking that you're due for another self-assessment in, say, February of next year, then you would have wanted to made some progress towards accomplishing these objectives based on the results of that next self-assessment. It could also be based on what we talked about earlier tonight, that, gathering stakeholder feedback as well could be another piece of an evaluation measure. And we obviously don't know how that, is going to form up yet. But there are other ways that you can evaluate yourselves as well. If we're talking about process evaluation or impact, the impact would really be the results of that next self-assessment survey. Process things could be things like, the number of board meetings you're having, the number of committee meetings you're having, things like that, like process objectives as well. So yeah, evaluation can take on a number of different forms, but that does need to be included in this directive.
Any thoughts about this? And I know you still have to spend some time with it. And again, it may shift a little bit, as corrections are made. But any thoughts related to what we want to use as our evaluation tool, or how we want to evaluate these action steps? Mr. Barlament has identified two things. One is the self-assessment, which seems to be one of the most natural ways, but then also stakeholder data, which we're still building.
I think both of those things are good. I agree that since we generated these action steps from our own self-assessment, that it would be good also to see how we feel about our progress and the next time we do our self-assessment, but that it might also be another piece of information to get the impressions from stakeholders as well. So we do both things. Do we have to have like one product, or do we just need to name like how we're going to evaluate ourselves?
This sounds a lot to me like what we do as we build the strategic plan. We put the objectives down of what we're doing, and then we tell what the measurement is going to be. We define how we're going to evaluate it at the time that we do it. And some of it is just completing the training, as we've done in some instances. And some of it, I don't know that we can have a better measurement than some other eyes upon us, if you would. And interimly, or I think minimally, I know we do the evaluations for our training sessions every time, but maybe the board could do its own assessment of the training sessions that we keep internally, or just do it through a poll and let that accrue or accumulate, and then at some point take a look at it and see how we're doing. So there are probably some things that we can do, as long as we're doing it virtually, that make it very easy for us to start measuring our own perception of how we're doing, because that's a continuation of the self-assessment in my perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Dykeman and Ms. Davis. Others?
I don't have anything to add. Yeah, I'm not ignoring you. I just don't.
Okay. I just want to be sure I'm not missing anyone, because it is as a board, we have to be comfortable with what we're going to be doing.
I mean, I think the way Kara summarized it I understood it. So.
Okay. And so what I think I hear is that it's okay for us to move forward and identify our self-assessment as the actual way in which we'll evaluate these action steps. But again, that being a start. So we may also, or we could also use stakeholder data, particularly once we've created that and solidify how we're going to do that. And then there may be other ways in which we can assess or evaluate our trainings as we have them. All of the action steps were not, I don't think all areas included training, but most of them did. So again, what I hear is self-assessment is our evaluation tool and possibly stakeholder data.
I thought I was adding measurable results too. So I apologize if that didn't come through in my conversation. But just looking at develop a policy review process, just adding an element of time to that gives you something to measure. Adding an element of what it should encompass gives us something to measure and evaluate. So there are other ways to do that. And so that's what I was asking for.
Okay, well, so were you asking to add time to?
Yes, it simply says develop a policy review process. So if we add an element of time by such and such time, then that gives you something to measure. You either met that objective or you didn't meet that objective, right? And then if we say develop a policy review process, ensuring with a focus on equity inclusion, then again, that gives us something to measure that policy review process by or to evaluate it by. And that's simply by looking at the policy, you can tell that. So that seems like a measurement to me.
So are you able to see the column that says when?
Yes, I see that.
But you're saying add that to the statement itself?
Yes. Add that to the action step statement.
Okay, I'm not clear why we would do that if we have the date.
Okay, so the charge was that they were outdated, right? And so the value add that we would make is we're reviewing these policies, not because of them just being outdated, but in relationship to our new charter system and how we're operating as a district. So we're adding a little bit more in there than just changing the dates on the policies. And I think it should be more explicit, or it could be more explicit as a means of measuring the quality of the work that we're doing. Doesn't have to change at all. I've got 2 more years and yeah, I'm good.
We have a policy review process we haven't been following. So we don't need to develop a policy review process. We have one, we just haven't been following it. So review policy seems like the most important step.
So just to clarify what I think that Linda is saying, Linda, you are saying that you would like more clarification on what these action steps mean so that we could be more clear on whether or not we're doing these things.
And I want them to be, it's an action plan. And so thank you, Dr. Dyckman. I wanted to be clearer on the objective of doing this. Why are we doing this? And then what are we adding to this to make sure that we are moving the district forward according to our strategic plan? And so again, to put the element of time in there is important, but I think it's also important to say we're reviewing the policies, and the things that we're also validating would be their applicability, for lack of a shorter word, to our current charter system environment, right? So we're updating as well as reviewing these policies.
Yeah, I guess what I was thinking is that this maybe is just like a little shorthand to make sure that there are steps, or not steps, but there are action items enumerated, but then like what actually goes into like number 2 of review policies, there's obviously more to that. And I guess I'm not sure whether that, I understand what you're saying, and I'm wondering whether that needs to be in this document or whether we just have to have that information. Like, what does it mean, review policies, or what does it mean, update policies? My only question is whether it needs to be in this particular document or somewhere else.
Okay, I may have fallen asleep on this conversation then, so I'm good.
So I would just encourage you to take a look. Again, none of this is, we're not wedded to this. So if there are like grammatical things, or if there are things that need to be pulled out, the most important thing is that just share that with the full board as you're able to go inside and look at these. So for instance, if we need to change the wording, if we need to remove the first action step, and if we need to say review and update policies, or I think someone said something earlier about including equity in our review process. Just share that, or, like reach out to myself or the whole board. And that way we can get a general idea when everybody is okay with, satisfied with the action items. But I didn't get the impression that our action steps needed to have a lot of more specific information in there, but I'm more than happy to, I can ask that as well. All right. Is this area considered resolved? Right. We'll use our self-assessment and stakeholder data, and that board members will look at this area and follow up with the board if there are area action steps or anything in the summary needs to be changed. Okay. And I can't see everybody, but all right. So moving forward then to standard 1.7, Directive 2. Under standard 1.7, Directive 2, you'll see here that there were 2 directives, and the notes that were made under that first directive is that we did reconcile the difference between like the policy and the website. There was some errors there. We also know that we already post all of our committee meetings. That's generally our practice as it relates to the Open Meeting Act. I wanted to turn our attention to this second directive, and that is, it reads, use the advisory committee structure to effectively gather feedback to help all board members receive the same information. So I'm just going to share this observation, and then I want to open the floor for how we might address this. What I've noticed is that with some of our committees, we actually have not just the committee, but we have a quorum of the board there. So for instance, if we take policy, but it's been the case with property too. So it says no one particular one. And based on what I've been able to gather and observe, I think this is what this directive is speaking to. So I was speaking with Mr. Barlament. Dr. Thomas also followed up with Cognia to ask them. And I think we are going to have to do something different. So we know that we have committees and that this board values committees, but we have to, I think we need to talk a little bit more about, are our committees and are we using those committees effectively? So for instance, I think maybe last week's policy meeting or the week before last, I can't remember. There were, I think, 6 or 7 board members there. And all board members, as our practice, have input, but only the people on that committee take the vote. So the question is, well, when we get to work session, if 7 out of 9 of us were there, what what has the committee, what's the use of the committee, or having that information discussed yet again in work session. So I think we need to discuss how we can more effectively use our committees. I think that is what this is getting at. I'm going to open the floor for any other interpretations, thoughts, disagreements, ideas.
I was just going to share, Dr. Gann, I have had a couple of conversations with Cognia as well, and also had a couple of conversations with GSBA around this. And so I think when we initially were reviewing the feedback, we focused more on the open meetings part. And because we published that meeting, then it should not be an issue with the number of members that attend. But in having the conversation with both entities, it was more of an issue that when everyone, if you have, let's just say 5 or 6 people there, your 3 or 4 committee members, and then another 2 or 3 other members of the board there, and you get into discussion, frequently you essentially get to a place of making a decision in a committee versus having that decision made as a whole board. So if you have a majority of the board present at a committee meeting and you get into a deep discussion about a particular issue, you can easily drift over into that space of making a decision. Even if you don't officially vote for that decision, a decision is in essence made in that committee structure.
And that is exactly what happens. And honestly, I attend the policy committee meeting because otherwise I don't get the full discussion of the policy that we're talking about as a board member. So if I'm not in those meetings, then the richness of that conversation is lost to me. So that puts you in a kind of a precarious situation. Do you go to the meetings and sit there and, you know, maybe I don't have to say anything or shouldn't say anything, but if I want that clarification, I either we go into the full board meeting or the work session and we end up having to send it back to policy because of the questions that come up. Whereas I've learned that if I'm at the policy committee meeting, I can get my questions answered usually. So that does present to me quite a challenge, especially as it relates to policy. But being on the other side, if I miss a policy committee meeting and then policies come up for the full board, I'm in that same place. I've either got to dig deeper there or we're going to end up discussing that policy again in the work session because I have unanswered questions.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think that comes up with property committee meetings too, right? So sometimes there are property committee meetings, and if you don't go to the property committee meetings, then you don't actually know what's happening. So that if it comes to a vote, like you don't have as much information. And I'm glad we're having this discussion. I don't think that it's anybody's fault. I just think it is worth talking about what the purpose of the committees are and what the purpose should be and how we can make sure that everybody is getting the information they need.
And as we talk about this, can we exclude property committee meetings that are in executive session? Or do people classify those in the same manner? Because when we're in the executive session with property, then, you know, there is no decision made per se, but it certainly is,
Well,
some big decisions are made. So are people making an exception for executive committees with a property or not?
I don't think, my example was like executive session, because I think that we call it a property committee meeting, but really if everybody needs to get that information, it really should just be part of a regular meeting and still in executive session, but
right.
It shouldn't really be a committee meeting, right?
I think that's the difference. And so it's my experience that almost every board member tries to get to property committee meetings because it isn't usually they're held in executive session, especially if there's something sensitive being discussed. And if you don't do it there, you don't get a chance to discuss it. So it's either that or excuse yourself from the regular meeting and go into executive session to have that conversation. But property committee does the same thing all of the other committees do. And that is, they make a recommendation to move something forward to the full board. All of our committees are structured that way. We take no votes in committees. But again, I think the richness of the conversation is what we lose by having all of that in the committees and the full board not participating. And so again, I think it's a extreme, I don't know how we do this more efficiently, quite frankly, but the extreme burden would come on having to attend all of these meetings or be at all of these meetings just to know what's going on. So maybe we need to look at how we get information out to board members.
If I may say something, this is just my take on this statement about the advisory committee structure, because I think we are talking about some things that need to be talked about, but my reading of the Cognia report is that this was specifically about quote, special interest groups in the community. And so when it says effectively gather feedback, that means from the community. And the whole advisory committee discussion that they refer to, they say it's in policy BBS, but it's actually BBC. But the advisory committees are about citizen participation. So I just wanted to say that my read on this directive was about making sure that all board members get community feedback. And so anyway, what we're talking about, I think, is also relevant, but I just wanted to say that my reading is very different about this directive. That was more about what is said in the Cognia report. Interviews reveal that the presence of special interest groups in the community who perceive their function as an advisory group has sometimes impeded the work of the board. That's the beginning of the whole paragraph on that. So anyway, that's just my take.
So, yeah, I think I'm at this place where in this conversation, in the part that you hear under evidence here, are we on number 2 yet? Or are we still on number 1? Utilize advisory committee, right?
Yeah, we're talking about number 1, and the evidence are really, I think, more so notes that have been jotted down while we've discussed these.
Okay.
Can I make?
Go ahead, Tish.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think non-committee members coming to committee meetings is a reflection of 2 things. One is the lack of good communication and minutes being provided from these meetings. I know they're recorded, so we could go watch them ourselves, I suppose. But I know the meetings that I've attended that I was not on the committee for tended to be a concern that something wasn't maybe being handled thoroughly enough, or so there's a problem of trust. How we trust other members of the board to handle something and bring us their best recommendation. If we don't trust each other to do that, we aren't going to leave it to them. We're going to insist on every last detail for why they made the recommendation that they made. So if we're working on our trust building, which I think is something we need to do, and we can work on our communication, which means more thorough committee reports, which I'm totally falling down on the job with. If we could make that a more stringent requirement that all the details of those meetings are available, we might solve this and not have to have non-committee members participating in the committee meetings.
Again, I do think that we need to look at the executive committee of property differently, because we were actually, even though we weren't voting in the executive committee, we were directing staff, i.e. the superintendent, to go further into negotiations on certain properties. Now, I don't know how you put that into a report and put it out as an email. I mean, I wouldn't advise that. And you certainly don't want to, if you're in the middle of negotiations, you don't want to have a report in a public meeting. So again, I'm just trying to carve out an exception before we paint everything with the same brush.
Well, I don't think they need to be, I mean, I agree they need to be an executive session, but I think it needs to be a whole board meeting if it requires whole board input and not a committee meeting, just not called a committee meeting. 'Cause it's
Yeah,
not
and if-
really a committee meeting.
And if the committee is simply giving the committee is simply giving the superintendent direction or indicating to the superintendent that they think it's a reasonable thing to go forward with, that's all they're doing. I still don't think it's giving, it shouldn't be a vote. Now, if you're counting votes because people were present and saying, yeah, that's probably a yes vote because nobody said anything, I think that's wrong too. I think that it's just a committee meeting and it goes forward. When it comes to exceptions, I think the thing that we're trying to protect in property negotiations is making sure that we don't reveal something that changes the terms of the negotiation. And so we shouldn't be referring to that property by its real name as the county does when they're doing big deals. They don't tell you the address or anything. They create code names for things that they're negotiating for. And that's been my experience in corporate too. You don't give that detail. You give the people are making a decision based on, the practicality of what you're trying to do, and the place may not matter or should not matter or should not be disclosed in that regard. So I think there are ways to protect that level of privacy is what I'm trying to say, Greg. And so I don't think property should be an exception to whatever we decide about our committees.
No, it can't be an exception because remember, we have to check and then also sign an affidavit. Now, in one of our training, I think it was Angela Palm was saying minutes. But now, as I stated in that meeting, the affidavit is the minutes. And in fact, if you go and look at the affidavits in our policy, that's what it says, minutes. And you can't change that because when it comes down to discussing something in executive session pertaining to what we've been doing with policy, it's got to remain that way. And I heard something about a whole board committee. Well, I don't think you can do that because see, you have 4 members on a committee, as well as the property committee. And then of course, board members are welcome to come participate in discussion. And obviously, I think we're all aware of the fact that you can't vote because if you vote, then of course, you have passed it before it's sent to the entire board.
Yeah, I didn't mean a whole board committee. I just meant there are some things that maybe should actually be in a whole board meeting instead of a committee meeting if it really does require everybody to be there.
I don't know, maybe Mike needs to weigh in on that. It has never been that way. I'm not saying that it can't be that way now, but and that's why I said what I said earlier. There are boards of education around this state. They are doing away with committees. And by doing that, what you said now, Kara, perhaps that can take place. But, we have a policy on these committees.
And so maybe we need to restate that policy or make sure that we're clear on what that policy is about and what the duties of the board are, because I think that would definitely bear revisiting as a part of our ongoing training to make sure that we're all on the same page of what's expected out of that committee. I'd like to see some of that happen.
And I just reiterate that a committee is designed to make a board more efficient. The details that we go over in policy committee don't need to be discussed by the whole board, whether Mr. Gilbreth and Mr. Pruitt are on the same page about a particular contract, the wording of a particular contract, that does not need to be addressed in a public full board meeting. We can work out those details, but you guys have to trust each other and the members of the committee to do a good job. And if you don't trust us and you want to come to every single meeting and listen in and put in your 2 cents, then that does break down. It makes the meetings much less efficient.
I totally agree with that, Patricia. There's some things, the entire board, the 9 of us, especially with policy, all of these with policy or property committee and whatnot, you don't need the whole, the entire board involved in that. process. I think it sort of simplifies it, like what Trisha said a few minutes ago. It got to be trust, and then of course you have the minutes, and then things once, especially with the property committee, once a decision is made, you know, in terms of purchasing property, selling property, or whatever, that's going to be explained to the entire board explicitly in a board meeting.
But to answer Kara's point, it seems to me that minutes could be more detailed, and especially for her, you know,
Yeah.
about the property committee, we could share minutes of property committee meetings with each other with some sort of, I don't think those would be, if we said that they were not open to open records, can we not make those proprietary? It seems like, Mr. Pruitt, if you're discussing a property and property minutes and you want to share those minutes with the rest of the board in an email, is that not possible to keep out of open records because it's a property committee discussion?
Right. So minutes of executive session are not subject to Open Records Act, but members of the board could certainly review those.
But minutes of a property committee meeting, well, I guess that's in executive session. So property committee goes into executive session. Yeah. So it would be an executive session. Yeah. So those minutes could be shared with the rest of the board if they were kept proprietary.
And again, so how much information is in those minutes it becomes the question. So it's not a matter of not trusting. It's just a matter of having enough information to make a decision to vote on. For me, it's information that I tend to need a little bit more maybe than some people, but I'm willing to certainly adjust my thinking and my information needs as we can. And so I have tools. And so I think every other board member does too. If anything hits the agenda that we need more information on, then we simply get to ask for more information.
I do want to suggest that if we do what we're suggesting, we're going to need to use more of staff help, because I know with the Government Relations Committee, we would need to have someone designated to take fairly extensive notes to follow a discussion, and certainly we don't have that now, and it hasn't been raised as an issue, but we would need that. And the same thing goes with the policy committee discussions, because all that's coming out is Mike's recommendation and then whatever changes were made, but none of the discussion. So I think I don't want to obligate us to do something that is going to put more work on staff.
So would a compromise be not necessarily restricting who can come to the meetings, but limiting participation to the committee? And that way you're actually, you know what's going on. So if I go to superintendent evaluation, if it's like, I don't know, I'm sort of thinking through this as I'm talking, because eventually, like I think of the property committee is a little bit different than, let's say, policy or government relations. But I wonder if that would be some sort of compromise, and that, you know, that we don't get rid of committees. We still have them. People can still come, but the work of that committee remains the work of that committee. I haven't thought through this long enough to figure out how it applies to all committees.
May I make an observation? Dr. Knox pointed out a while ago, and I looked it up, and now I'm looking at this, and I think he's right. Advisory in the cognitive report on page 8, where it talks about advisory committees, those are citizen committees.
Right.
And all you're talking about and what you have under your evidence column here is talking about your standing committees. That's different than advisory committee.
So I think we're still talking about our standing committees. That's number one. We haven't moved to number two yet, have we?
Yes, we've moved to number 2.
Okay.
So so would you all like us to follow back up with Cognia? From my understanding, Dr. Thomas, and you can clarify, I was not a part of this conversation, but you asked specifically, what did they mean by this directive?
You're muted.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Yes, that was what I asked them, and they said to me, what I said was that we need to effectively utilize the structure that we have in place to get information. And it kind of actually, some of the conversation goes back to what Dr. Yeager mentioned, is a trust issue. Was what they alluded to, was that we should be able to conduct committee business and share that information with the board as a whole, without the entire board feeling that they have to be at every committee. So I hear what you're saying, Mike. So that term advisory committee is questionable, and I can reach out to Dr. Schaefer about that tomorrow. But that was how he discussed that the committees we have in place should basically be able to provide advisement to the board as a whole based on their work in that committee structure.
I'm just trying to help us along, because it may be that we're addressing some things that Cognia may not be emphasizing. So going back to them and asking if this second directive is really focused on feedback from the community, that might help us reduce our workload, maybe.
I can make a call tomorrow morning.
Right.
But just to follow up on what Lakeisha was saying, I agree totally with what is being talked about, and we should go back. But I think I just posted a comment, which is the truth, is that I used to go, when I first joined the board, I went to other committee meetings, but I never participated. I was there simply to learn, but I was not part of the process. Now I don't know when I got away from that, because obviously I have, but that was how it was. And Charles, I don't know if that was your memory or not, or Linda, but that's mine.
Yeah, but you could have, Greg, you made the decision not to participate, being on the board. If you go to policy and you're not on the policy committee, you can have input. Same thing with any other committee. But now going back to what Dr. Knox said, and Mike verified this, talking about an advisory committee, that's totally confusing to me, because you're talking about citizens. Now, citizens can come and attend these meetings, but they don't have any business in participating in these committee meetings. Now, when we are meeting in executive session with property, no, they cannot attend. That's been my understanding. Am I correct on that, Mike?
Yes, sir. All committee meetings are open, but advisory committees are actually, that's a whole different type of committee. That's not property or finance or any of that. What the Cognia report says is that you have a provision in policy DBC for advisory committees, but they found no evidence you'd ever appointed one or used that structure. That's what I read. Dr. Knox, I know you've looked at it. Is that what you read?
Yes, and I think the idea to get feedback to all board members was because there was a perception that some board members were closely allied with special interest groups. That's how the report, that paragraph of the report reads, and so we're talking about other things that don't have to do with advisory committees, but with standing committees that maybe parallel it but are not the same thing.
Okay.
So Dr. Thomas, do you mind following up with is it Dr. Harris? I can't remember.
No, Dr. Schaefer. So what?
Dr. Schaefer.
Either reach out tomorrow to Attorney Pruitt or Dr. Knox, just to make sure I understand their understanding, so that I can correctly ask the question to him.
Okay, and then if you could, after you ask the question to him, if you could send us an answer so that we'll know how to move forward. Of course, if they are referencing advisory committees, then I do think the actions that we would have taken for standard 1.4, I think it was, would suffice as a way to gather stakeholder data. But if they are talking about our standing committees, which was our impression from when you spoke with them initially, then we need to also be thinking through how we make our current committee structures more effective. We probably should be thinking through that anyway, honestly.
Right.
But that can just guide at least the immediate steps that we take.
Okay.
Is everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Fine.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you. So we're going to move forward under the other items for discussion. And again, this is more so beginning the work. We already have identified the 4 Thursdays of the month for professional development for next semester. We have completed our self-assessment. We have also talked before about just some areas of interest as it relates to professional development. And so I wanted to start to fill in a professional development calendar for next year, given where we are with our Cognia report, but also given where we are with like where the district is heading, right? As far as like strategic planning. I know there are some other topics that people have brought up before. And so I wanted to open the floor for any additional ideas that you have for professional development for next semester.
My ideal on that is we probably would need to wait and see what Cognia or what type of report Cognia you're going to give us in December before we start setting a professional development calendar, because we may be getting ahead of ourselves. Now, that's just my thought on that. Others may have their thoughts.
So that's very, that point is well taken. I would think that we would move forward like we did this semester. So we had a general idea of the topics that we wanted to cover, but we also were taking that from our self-assessment and had to remain open to change. And so if when we get our report from Cognia, if they are saying that we need to do something totally different or there are some additional findings, we can adjust the professional development calendar. I just want us to have at least a structure. And part of one of their directives was also for us to build our professional development around our self-assessment. We've done our self-assessment. We see what some of those areas are. So I do think we can go ahead and put a tentative list of topics in place.
How many professional development training sessions you are referring to?
Currently, I'm only referring to right now next semester, so January through May. But I also wanted to, we also would likely do a retreat at some point, either in December or January. And so we can include professional development there as well. So that would be, I think, five Thursdays. We do have some, there are some recommendations from the report as well for ongoing team building and conflict management. We may want to, we'll have new board members coming on. So it's certainly okay from my perspective to revisit some of the things we've done. And these are not the only opportunities for professional development. We can actually participate in other ones, but this is more whole board. Dr. Yeager?
I would like us to follow up on our conversation about equity and diversity training for the board. We've talked about that a little bit. I think it's still sitting there. The other one is, I think,
You're fading out, Dr. Yeager.
Sorry.
Okay.
So I was encouraging us to do some more diversity, equity, and inclusion training and link that to the equity part of our strategic plan and really dig down into that as a board professionally and see what other best practices are and how we can do that better.
Thank you for sharing that. I've jotted that down, Dr. Yeager.
And I really like roadmaps. And so we're getting new members on the board. I know that they will get to go to GSBA new member orientation. But I would like for us to make sure that we've included something, some activity that the board can do to help participate in orientation with our new members. I know that Dr. Thomas will have some things that she'll be doing administratively, but maybe some team building or just a chance to step off on a fresh page in the new year with the new board.
So some team building, Ms. Davis, is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, team building, looking at the year ahead, the strategic plan, and maybe we set up, I know we've got this on here to look at our calendar for next year to just introduce it to us so that we can again affirm that this is the direction that we need to go in January for sure. And then I would love for us to, make sure that we build that calendar with the critical dates that we have in terms of reporting and structure. I want to also suggest that we are a charter system, and we started this whole process several years ago, right? 5, 6 maybe. And we have now matured as a state in terms of how we are and what a charter system is. I'd like for us to devote some time to understanding our roles in that whole charter system contract that we have so that we can know how to properly interact with our LSGTs and make sure that we stay focused on the things that we need to drive us, and just set some priorities for ourselves in terms of growth around financial management and budgetary things, because I think that's a big part of our work. And I'd like to see us spend a little more time on that. And
if I could add to that, Linda, I think how we do interact with our LSGT teams, because I don't think we've got clarity on that even, but I think you're right on spot.
I think our path ahead is going to be building strong schools wherever they are with whatever they've got, and making sure that we're still meeting the needs of all of our children.
Okay. Thank you for that feedback. Others? Dr. Yeager.
I'd like to think about helping us understand our students, whether it's working with Grace Bagwell-Adams or working with some of the community activists to give the board a much better sense of who our students are, the diversity of our students, and this, where they're at and what the challenges are. I know the LSGTs is a really good way to do that, so this may follow up on what we just heard. It could be we work with the LSGTs, but the Wellbeing Project and the attempts to kind of look at school by school by school, who the population of students are and what their needs are. I could sure use a lot more. I've listened to Grace give a few talks about this, and it's always enlightening to me what our families are going through. And I think many of us don't have any idea sometimes. So, that's a possibility in terms of professional development, is knowing your students, right? Knowing who your students are and what their needs are, and understanding the better ways of meeting their needs. Maybe that's too much operations, but I know Grace has her hands full right now with COVID, but she's a talented member of our community, and she knows our student population really, really well.
And in the past, she's actually presented to the board at least every year that I've been on the board. So yeah, as a part of one of our work sessions or one of our board meetings. So
I don't believe she's done it since I've been on the board, so it's been over a year.
Yeah, we've kind of been in chaos in your tenure, but it's better now. It's getting better.
Any others? And certainly feel free to share. We'll start trying to pull this information together. We may actually reach out to the board at large to see how we can, as it relates to building, starting to plan the retreat. But if you have any other ideas, please send those ideas to the whole board.
So I know we kind of stopped talking about the committee structure, and I'm fine with that, but can we put this as a follow-up item to address, to have that larger discussion about our current committee structure and their roles and responsibilities, to maybe just have that review as a part of our first semester, first quarter next year?
And perhaps that may be a, and some of these, not just this one, but that may be a good retreat topic.
Oh, that's great.
Okay. Well, thank you for your feedback. We'll move forward with item 4.2, our next year's board calendar. Ms. Palmer graciously created a draft for us to look at, for us to adjust. We need to make any changes, but I am going to direct your attention there. We're not voting on it tonight, so this will be on a future. Ms. Palmer and Dr. Thomas and Dr. Maddox, is it November or December's regular meeting? But we wanted to go ahead and, since we're talking about planning, we wanted to go ahead and make some decisions regarding this.
I think it's December because it
about
goes
to say.
from January to December.
Okay.
And we didn't cover it yesterday in our agenda setting, so had it been
Okay.
November, we would have covered it yesterday.
The floor is open for you to share any comments, suggestions.
Oh, I'm not seeing it.
I'm pulling it up.
Okay, good. Thank you.
All right.
So just to be clear, these are just the dates, not the plan for topics.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
So I did look at this earlier, and so the one meeting in December, in the past, we didn't have that first meeting because the annual holiday parade was the first Thursday in December. So do we think we're gonna have?
Ms. Linda, that's exactly right.
It's for next year, so hopefully we will. I don't know.
Also, we didn't have but one meeting in December because of GSBA annual conference in Atlanta.
That's right.
And of course, Mr. Payne used to go every year, and I know we have others that serving as a liaison with GSBA, but that's another reason. In fact, that was the main reason we didn't have that but one meeting in December.
Oh, they told me it was the Christmas parade. Anyway, all right. Either one's a good excuse, but Now, I'm not sure I understand the one meeting in July if needed. What would constitute a need?
In the past, Dr. Thomas can, it on other calendars, it always said that. I don't think you always had a meeting in July, but I believe
Right.
when I came
I was about
on,
to say, what Lynn just put in is personnel. I was
Okay,
gonna say, we usually have to sometimes have a call, not a call meeting, but have one scheduled, so it would be called in case we needed to vote to get personnel approved so that they could begin in August.
awesome. Okay.
That is exactly correct, Dr. Thomas, because in the past, we said the month of July, board members would have the month of July off, but almost always we had a call meeting because we needed to go ahead and approve personnel because people needed to know whether they had a job or not. But you're exactly correct.
That's correct. And this year, because of other things going on, we tagged some other items onto that agenda, but the purpose in general is so that we can just approve that personnel list.
That's correct.
So that brings another thought relative to the calendar, and that was I think we've had a special vote each for the last 2 years about offering contracts early or different from the date that they were previously done. Has that now been committed to policy so that we don't have to have a call meeting for that or a special meeting for that?
Ms. Duke is on now because they're all on for the next item. Can you speak to that, Ms. Duke?
We didn't this past year vote for early contracts for people. We approved all of the regular contracts so early now. So we don't need to do that anymore.
Oh, great. Thank you.
But I thought, Lynn, I thought we did vote to give human resources the opportunity to hire, to do new hires in advance. Is that something different?
You're right, but we did, we took contracts to you in January, and that's early enough. That's when we used to give you or ask you to approve hiring 20 people or something like that before we had resignations. But since we're doing contracts so early, we get those resignations early enough to do early hires.
Yeah, also what helped with that, and this started back when we went through the recession, I believe in 2008, 2009. The law used to be that contracts had to be back in no later than April 15th. And that law changed and moved it down to May 15th, I believe. I know it was in May, may not be 15th. And they never did change it back. So that helped some too, in terms of contracts.
Okay. Other questions or any suggested changes?
Is the December 11th meeting on a Thursday? I have it on a
I may have messed up and I'm
Saturday.
I may have looked at 2020 instead of 2021. You are correct. I will correct that on this one.
Should be the 9th.
Yes, ma'am. If that's when you all want it.
That sounds good. All right, any other questions or thoughts from people that have not spoken yet? If you think of any, please send those to the full board and Dr. Thomas and Ms. Palmer. As mentioned earlier, this will be on our December agenda to approve. Okay. All right, we'll move forward with our school reopening update. Dr. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Gant. Thank you to all of our board members. We will not do a full 1 hour presentation tonight, so don't worry. I do want to give a large, huge thank you to our team and specifically to Mr. Lawrence Harris and Ms. Beth Moore, Mr. Harold Faison, and Mr. Alex Borges. They have worked tirelessly for the last week to ensure that we were prepared for our community forums that were held on Tuesday and Wednesday of this week, and to make sure that our team had everything we needed. And I thank our team as well. Not just our cabinet members, but we had members of our instructional staff as well as our school support staff that helped to support those events on Tuesday and Wednesday at Clark and Cedar. We had people there to make sure we were socially distancing. Our nurses were doing temperature checks. We had, thank you to our custodial staff. They were there, and plant services staff had set up. We had hand sanitizers, gloves, masks. They brought the defoggers and all of the equipment that they will be using in the schools. Clark Central and Cedar were very gracious to host us this week. So a lot of work went into preparing to ensure that we had a smooth community forum opportunity for our stakeholders. We moved the one on Wednesday, to the auditorium instead of the gymnasium, because we did not have a crowd at Cedar Shows, and the auditorium at Clark Central provided for better sound quality. So those were the two events that were held. If you were not able to log on, if you go to our district website, you can click on reopening information, and there under additional reopening resources is the presentation, the slide deck from Tuesday and Wednesday, as well as a video from Wednesday. So you can hear those presentations and also read that information. Also on that website is a section entitled Healthy Every Day. And we have a webinar that was done by Nurse Amy Rourke on our health and safety procedures that we will be using in our schools. There's a reopening guidebook in English and Spanish. There's a reopening infographic there. We have a video from Barrow Elementary students. We have a wear your mask video. And we also have a symptom checklist for going back to school. What we have done as a team is collected questions that have come into us via either just emails to me and you as a board, to our cabinet, to the reopening team. We also collected questions that came in through the thought exchange last night and Tuesday night, and Mr. Harris is working with his team for us to answer those questions, and we will post those responses on our website. Many of the questions are very similar in content, and so we will merge those questions together. And in addition, what we did prior to having our sessions on Tuesday and Wednesday was we went through those questions and we embedded as many of the answers as we could into those presentations so that they don't have to be on that long spreadsheet of responses. So we have that information out there for you. We have all of our cabinet plus Nurse Amy Rourke have joined us now. If you have questions, I know Dr. Dykeman sent me a great question earlier today about the partitions that we're purchasing and the value add of those partitions, and would it be more beneficial to our students and staff if that money was spent on air purifiers, and kind of why those partitions were chosen. I did share back in the email with each of you that that piece of equipment was something that was brought to us by a couple of our principals. And I know Mr. Fisher then went around and talked to some principals and got feedback, but he can give you more information in regards to that question that was asked by Dr. Dykeman. So Mr. Fisher, I'll turn that over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Thomas, and good afternoon to all our board members. Some time ago, one of the principals for one of the elementary schools had suggested dividers for the desk for our students. So we did some research, started looking at dividers, and want to look at the safety feature of those dividers, Also want to make sure that the dividers, that if the students sit down, they can see either in front of them or either on the side of them. I visited 3 elementary schools, Timothy, Chase, and Gaines. I met with the principals. I also met with the teachers, and they were the dividers were very well received from those groups. And we have had actually more requests for dividers, in my opinion, than we have had for air purifiers. I felt like with the dividers, it would help with the stop or the spread of the COVID-19 or the flu or the cold, with the students having those dividers on those desks. So that's why we went with the dividers. Also, Dr. Diamond asked me about the when will they be in. We anticipate delivery of those dividers next week, early next week. So we should get those in. We will make sure that we get those out to the school. Every student in the district will get an individual divider for his or her desk. So some of the teachers was talking about decorating the dividers and use them. So we thought it was a good idea to go with the dividers. And even from a cost standpoint, we felt like that would be the way to go. Now, let me say something about air purifiers. Air purifiers are a great item. And I think like Dr. Thomas said last night, we don't want to spare any expense, but the research that we have been doing, and I really want to emphasize this, there has not been a documented case in the United States where an individual caught COVID through a ventilation system. There's been one case documented worldwide, that was in Hunan, China. So again, not saying that air purifiers won't work, it probably would be great. But again, I think what we want to do, make sure with the dividers and having those for each individual students, we thought that would be the way to go. Moving forward, if we continue to get more requests for air purifiers, then we would take a look at it and we would come back to you all and say, hey, a lot of people, teachers and administrators ask for air purifiers, and we'll come back to you all and say, hey, this is what the cost would be district-wide, and we'll see what happens. But I do want to emphasize, I think air purifiers are great, but like I said, I think we went with the dividers, and we think, that was the best choice for us to go at that time. Yes, ma'am, Dr. Yeager.
At the presentation for the Government Relations Committee last week, I guess, was it whenever it was yesterday? She talked about bipolar ionization being this is the Athens Tech president talked about this ionization technique is fairly inexpensive way of making the small particles cluster together and aggregate by a charge. And then they get caught in the larger filter. So you don't need a tiny filter to capture them. And she indicated that they were not very expensive. And I wondered if you had been able to follow up on her suggestion from that meeting.
Actually, talking with Mr. Bailey, our Director of Plant Services, we already have those, which I didn't know. We already have those in our systems, according to him.
Mr. Davis asked a question. Will the students take the dividers with them? Is that what you said, Mr. Davis?
I think you asked for high schoolers. When high schoolers.
Yeah, I was trying to, I think it's a good idea. I'm just trying to figure out, presumably, if the students are coming into the building, they're going into the classroom, they have one seat that they're there pretty much for the entire day. The divider will be on there, and then that's their assigned seat. And then they come back the next day and the divider is still with that desk, and that's where they sit. I'm trying to look at how it would go for, like, when you go into middle school, you start talking about labs, or I'm and then particularly in terms of, as I said, high school, when presumably we will still want to use these dividers on a high school level as well.
They're on purchase right now, K-5, isn't that correct, Mr. Fisher?
That's correct. But we did order The numbers that we ordered, we probably will have enough to get to our middle schools also. We want to make sure that our K through 5, our special ed students were covered with the dividers. And then we were going to look at the middle school. Mr. Davis, to answer your question, you can take these dividers with you. And that's the beauty of this. You can follow the divider up. The student can take, if they're transitioning from class, they can take the divider with them to their next class.
That's especially helpful with our elementary right now for kids as they go to specials, if they, if they happen to be going to art or something like that, or needed to go to a small group instruction, they could take their personal divider with them.
Yeah. You muted, Mr. Davis.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of them being able to keep track of them, but I'm sure they'll figure that out. I mean, but so they would be walking around with them like a book, for instance, or is that right?
But right now, again, they are elementary school are the primary purpose for the dividers at this point. And so with elementary students having them, they will, the majority of the time will be at their stationary, at their desk. Now, if those students had to go somewhere, let's just say it was a group of students that needed to go be served in ESOL, the dividers are portable, so they could take them with them if they needed to do that. So the choice that the principal shared were pieces of equipment that were easily mobile.
And that you can see out all 3 sides of the other dividers.
And Dr. Anderson is asking about what measures are there for special ed. And I know there's several different forms of PPE that have been purchased for them. And then right now, again, the intent for the dividers was K-5, but Mr. Fisher is saying we have them available. So if there is an identified need for middle school, then they will be available. But Mr. Gaskins, I don't know, or is Ms. Heel on the line where we can speak about special education? I know that additional PPE has been purchased for that group.
That's correct, Dr. Thomas. Additional PPE has been purchased for students and teachers for our special education students. I do want to just make a note that special education, that is a large group of students. So when we talk about additional PPE, we are talking about those adaptive students, those students with mild to severe disabilities, those students that are medically fragile, and not those students that may receive consultation special education services or co-taught special education services, just to clarify who we bought the additional PPE for. But also with that group of students, we are looking at a hybrid model for those students. So those students will have an opportunity to meet with their case managers and meet with their IEP teams. And if parents are not comfortable with those students coming in 5 days a week, we are looking at a hybrid schedule for our K-12 adaptive students to lower that class size and mitigate some of the risk for that group of students.
I've got a simple question, I think. Could I see a picture of what these dividers look like? I'm having a hard time getting it in my head.
I do not have, because you can see it on the video.
Okay.
I did do a demonstration both nights, Tuesday and Wednesdays. The only difference on the video that you would see is you won't see all 3 clear sides. The front of it is clear, but the ones that we ordered, all 3 sides are clear.
They kind of look like a trifold poster board, but
Yes.
clear on all 3 sides.
Yes, ma'am.
You're correct, Farrell.
So I'll just follow up on the question that I asked in the email, and I appreciate your explanation and the the recommendation and the request from the principals, the elementary school principals, to have these dividers, and then also the research on the transmission through the. Did you say through the
Through the ventilation system, yeah.
through the ventilation system. So I guess a lot of the concerns that I've been hearing have not been so much the concern of transmission from like one classroom to another classroom through the ventilation system, but more the transmission within that one classroom. So that was why I asked the question, because the dividers won't really affect that kind of transmission within one classroom. I mean, they'll obviously protect from spit or, you know, droplets and things like that. But the aerosols from the kids within that classroom can still get to other kids in that classroom. And so that's why I was asking about potentially, and I don't know if air purifier is the right thing, but something to increase the circulation of the air within the classroom itself.
I understand. And again, we'll continue to do research and, you know, keep looking at trying to get expert opinions, get outside recommendations, and keep, you know, pushing forward. And as you know, as we continue to learn more and more about the disease, you know, hopefully there can be other things out there that can be helpful for us for being indoors. So we'll continue to do those type of research and whatever we need to do to keep our kids, our students, and our staff safe, we will do that.
Any additional questions for Dr. Thomas and Cabinet?
So is that include a question for Nurse Rourke, just to give us an update on the cases and the percent positivity currently in Athens Clarke County and how that aligns with the original goals?
And Nurse Amy, while you're doing that, can you speak to the testing? I was going to do that, but you can do that while you're talking.
Sure. Good evening, board members. Thank you for this opportunity again. We are continuing to monitor what we have been monitoring all along, which is cases per 100,000, the 14-day trend, as well as the positivity rate. The last 14-day trend that came out from our DPH was published on October 26th, and the cases per 100,000 was 106 on that report, which is down from the previous 14-day trend report put out by the Northeast Georgia Health District that I believe was at 220. The positivity rate still remains under 5%. Did you have a question?
You broke up when you gave the number. It would just like quickly broke up. Could you just state the number again per 100,000?
200.
Okay.
206. So we've been looking at these measures as we have been all along, but we've also been kind of evaluating the CDC's new threshold for school reopening that I shared with you guys a few weeks back, and they include additional indicators. They encourage school districts to zoom out a little and look at a more comprehensive view of what's going on in your local community as guideposts that can help guide your school reopening decisions. So they encourage school districts to also consider certain infection mitigation measures and how many a school district is able to implement. There's 5 total recommended measures, and Clarke County is planning to implement all 5. They also encourage you to look at the percentage change in cases from the current 7 days to the previous 7 days, kind of trying to see what our overall trend is, if we're trending up or down, or making note of big spikes or decreases that may happen. They also encourage us to look at community data, our percentage used of hospital beds versus our percentage of used ICU beds versus the percentage of hospital beds that are used by COVID patients. So we are actually in the process of creating a kind of a data hub dashboard to monitor all of these and be able to plug in our daily data and see where Athens Clarke County is aligned with the CDC indicators for reopening table. We also, once we do reopen, really hope to add our specific data to be able to evaluate that as well. We'll have an additional data set once schools reopen in terms of how many isolations and quarantines we have in every school building, and we'll be able to evaluate that compared to the community transmission levels. I believe what Dr. Thomas wanted me to speak to was the fact that we are collaborating with the UGA medical partnership as well as the DPH to offer free back to school COVID testing for all students and families. And this is really very forward thinking. I don't know of any other school district that's offering it. You know, we can't mandate that our students or staff take tests, but we can certainly provide opportunities for them too. And that's what we've tried to do at the Hillsman Health Center. Many of our staff have taken advantage of that, but we decided to offer a testing day free for everybody, a drive-through line. The school nurses will be helping. And the idea of it being on Tuesday is that the results will be back before the first day of school on Monday, the following Monday. So it'll be interesting to see. It's a little bit of a surveillance test, although symptomatic individuals are welcome to come through the line as well. But it'll be interesting to see what percentage of our students and staff right off the bat are testing positive and negative. And we hope to be able to use that data to guide some of our future decisions moving forward. It is a PL day for staff. And so we've extended the clinic hours just as an FYI, an extra hour in the afternoon to accommodate staff schedules that day.
And Mr. Stevens, you were asking about looking at how major school districts are handling the threat. We have been looking at other districts. We've been consulting with folks who are working with other districts and trying to have creative ways if/when the second wave comes back. And you're correct, you know, there are 25 days left of instruction. We're hoping that we can have some significant impact on our K-8 students. Made the decision not to bring high school back because they are on a semester schedule. And for them, they will be changing classes. But that's not the case for our K-8 students. They will be with those same teachers. So it will give them an opportunity to connect, and it will also give our teachers, for those families who choose to return, the opportunity to really do some face-to-face monitoring of student growth and needs. And it's my belief that if we go back out in January, it will have provided teachers with an additional set of insight and information as they plan for that next wave of virtual instruction. And Nurse Amy did allude to this, but we've had several conversations with DPH and CDC, but particularly DPH, and they have assured us that the increase that people have spoken about over the last couple of weeks is not an actionable increase, and that overall the numbers in the area are stable. And this could be our norm, and we're not sure, and that's why we're trying to be sure that we're taking every mitigation method possible. But it will also help us to see, you know, we've all spoken significantly about university and the university effect, and what we don't know is how much those numbers, we know what they're doing to the Clark County numbers as a whole, but we don't know what they're doing to the Clark County school district numbers. And we will have our own subset of data to utilize moving forward and seeing how much overflow there is between the University of Georgia community and the Clark County School District community. But we are prepared to pivot just as we were this time. Nurse Amy will continue to meet with individuals, I think almost daily, and monitoring those numbers, monitoring what's happening in individual classrooms as well as individual schools. And, you know, we will make decisions for classes, schools, and the district immediately if the data shows that that's necessary.
And from my understanding, Dr. Thomas, if we have questions or concerns, I do want to reiterate the importance of reaching out with those questions and concerns. It is a lot of information to go through, but it's very helpful information. The PowerPoints that are there, the Q&A that will be posted tomorrow. But I do want to reiterate that, you know, these are very important questions. And this is not the only time that we can ask questions or share our concerns. So please, I want to encourage you all to do that by phone call, by email, whatever is most comfortable for you.
Yes, and we've encouraged that even prior to this point so that we would be prepared to address anything tonight and or in our sessions with the community. And as we shared last night, questions, it makes us better. We can't think of everything. I've been thinking a lot about the air purifiers and the equipment that Athens Tech uses. So I was excited to hear from Mr. Bailey that we already have that equipment in place. And I'm still constantly thinking, about the purifiers and what are options and what's best for our students. So we don't take your input lightly. We've utilized that. Dr. Maddox has given input just last week, and we made a pivot literally within 2 hours of totally changing some aspects of the community forum, and it worked and it went well. And so we are open to that input and feedback. Nurse Amy wants to say one more thing.
I just wanted to kind of reiterate what Dr. Thomas said. We attended the Athens-Clarke County Board of Health meeting last week and got a chance to ask Dr. Goggins, who is the medical director, epidemiologist for the Northeast Georgia Health District, some specific questions about Clarke County and about school reopening. And he initially stated that our whole region, the Northeast Georgia region, is seeing stable or decreasing trends right now. And I've actually pushed that. I raised my hand and asked a question about how numbers appear to be rising and how can we categorize that as stable or decreasing. And his answer was that the small increases we're seeing, in his opinion, as Dr. Thomas said, are non-actionable and they fall into a greater category as stable. And his public health advice to us was to monitor less day-to-day numbers, because we know data dumps and spikes and they go up and they go down, and but we can get kind of zoomed in on that, and we really need to zoom out a little bit and look at the bigger picture. He reiterated looking at the 7-day averages, the moving average of cases in Clarke County, and you'll note when you do that, that we are currently at the lowest case rate we have been since July, which is hard to believe for me, but it's true when you go and look at the graphs on the DPH page. So I think what his message to Dr. Thomas and I was that the summer surge has bottomed out a little bit, and we may hang around this current level for a while. It's unknown, the direction moving forward, but that's why we're going to continue to monitor it and actually try to monitor it more comprehensively so that we can continue to make decisions that are guided by public health as we move forward.
And Dr. Anderson had a question earlier on about school level plans and when they'll be available to all families, if you know that, or if all schools, this wasn't her question, but this is my question following up on that. If all schools are having some kind of like information session on their own.
Mr. Gaskins answered part of her question in the chat that teachers are communicating to parents during the conference day if they have a new teacher. Some of those notifications have already been sent. Middle schools are continuing to work on schedules, and some students will be notified next week. But then you had a part B. If you can ask that again, you froze, Dr. Dykeman, and I'm sure he'll be happy to answer.
Oh, sorry. It was an earlier question that she had, which was, when will school level plans be available to families?
When you, Dr. Anderson, can you clarify when you say school level plans, what do you mean, or what are you anticipating that would include?
Well, I mean, I'm just asking specifically about plans that schools are doing that may be separate from what the district is doing, or maybe unique to what the district is doing. In several meetings I've attended, lots of discussions have gone on about what your school's doing versus what your school's doing, because every school, of course, is different. Square footage is different, teacher capacity is different, student numbers are different. So I was wondering, are there going to be school level plans that are communicated to parents so that they know what they're walking into on November 9th for their specific schools? or are the videos that we're watching and the town halls simply are they just gonna be that?
So we have asked schools to create what we're calling their school playbook. It's an internal document for their staff. Their staff, they will go over those playbooks with their staffs next week during our prep to the return to in-person instruction. I will follow up with schools if they're doing anything specific as an orientation for parents. We have not asked them to do that. But it is my assumption, but I'll clarify this, that schools will connect with families around things around lunch and recess and car rider and bus dismissal. But I'll follow up, Dr. Thomas, and we can communicate that to the board.
And I'll just kind of go along with what Dr. Anderson said. I do think that different schools, parents who have kids in different schools are getting different amounts of information. And I think that's making the parents who are not getting a lot of information more anxious. So yeah, if you could follow up and just see how information is getting out to the parents of the different schools, I think it would be helpful.
Yeah, if I can follow up on what the two previous doctors said, what people are asking me is more about, people have a clear understanding, I think, or clearer understanding about what the classroom environment looks like, what lunch looks like, but it is like, when you look at the schedule, we've got kids we have a lot of children going into the building pretty much within a half-hour time period, I think. And so, normally when you stand in front of an elementary school before school, people are kind of pouring in, they're pouring off the buses in one door and they're pouring in the front door with another. And so I think that I'm not asking for you to answer that now, Ms. Gaskins, but I think those are types of questions that parents are going to want to know. What happens from day one? I'm going to drive my kid to school. What's that look like? Or I'm going to put my kid on the bus. What's it like when they get off the bus, to go where they need to go? So, and I do think it's very school specific. So, but again, I'm not putting you on the spot, but I do think that those are the questions that each parent is going to be asking of their school.
And that's definitely, Mr. Davis, a fair question. And I know that our principals have already planned for that. I think the missing piece is, how have we communicated that to our parents? Our principals have worked very hard on transitions alone. So I know that they have those answers. We just need to make sure that the communication is consistent to all of our stakeholders.
Okay. I see that there's one more question from Mr. Stevens. So if you all would answer that, and then I'm going to suggest that we move forward. Again, these are all great questions. And however, we have a direct line to Dr. Thomas. And so I want to encourage us to, share these questions and concerns with her directly. And Mr. Stevens' question was, if it's possible to leave the option open for parents to choose virtual learning once school has started after monitoring trends, I think. Yep, and if they'll be given the option to choose again before the November 9th start date, he has received Mr. Stevens has received a couple of complaints from parents that the understanding is that it is firm.
So Mr. Gaskins, you and I guess both can answer that. Parents have been given the opportunity to make a decision through conferences, which are next week. Isn't that correct, Mr. Gaskins?
Tomorrow is the conference day.
I've lost track of my days. They all are like one big day right now. And then the decision will be allowed to be made again in January, if I'm correct.
That's correct. And I think what's important is that we do want to meet the needs of parents. And I think that one thing that, and I'll say this, if a parent is having a concern based on trends, there are probably multiple parents that have that same concern, and we also have that concern, and we would be looking at shutting down that classroom or shutting down that school. But I think the other thing that is important that I would want to communicate with parents, as well as principals would want to communicate with parents, is that when we move students from one learning environment to another learning environment, that just doesn't happen overnight. That creates some interruption in their instruction, which is not good for any student. So we want to be firm about that January 15th date. We, of course, will meet with parents and talk with them and make sure they feel confident. We will make a change if a change is warranted and needed. But as we mentioned earlier, we have 25 days of instruction for in-person instruction. And I think really sticking to a consistent instructional model is going to be really, really important as it relates to learning. But we are very open to having those conversations with parents.
And I'll just wrap up, Dr. Gant. I see what Dr. Anderson is saying, and we will definitely need communication to be robust. And we do apologize that for some people it was a short notice. However, it was available online, and we did monitor that engagement as well. And I hate to say it, but even, you know, when we send things out a week and 2 weeks in advance, unfortunately, we frequently do not get the level of engagement that matches the level of work that goes into that planning. And sometimes we have people that say, we'll be there, and they still don't come. We consult with people about dates and they still don't come. So you know, it's hard. You know, principals deal with that a lot of times. They'll go into neighborhood communities and publicize they'll be there, and they might have one family show up. But the best thing we can do, and thank you for that, Mr. Stevens, is we've put it out there, and we have, I mean, it's video. So for families that weren't able to attend, short of missing the question answer session, which I have to believe out of about the 300 and something questions we've gotten, there's something there that kind of matches what people are going to ask. So I'm hoping that by us having that on video, people will be able to go back and access that information if they were unable to attend.
All right. Thank you.
And then I'm not sure, Dr. Yeager, there's a communication plan. You know, there's communication out there. We're doing regular communication. We're doing a dashboard that will give information out weekly. I think that's correct, Nurse Amy, about our numbers and status. There's an end size we're looking for in terms of reporting out by school versus by district. So if those numbers hit a certain level, we will do specific reporting. And we are continuing, as of now, our Friday communication every week that goes out to families, Dr. Yeager. And thank you, Dr. Anderson. And I didn't mean it that way. It's just so frustrating. Like, you can never find that sweet spot of the best way. So we've tried to make sure that at least it is out there by video. So if people could not come or chose not to come for whatever reason, they can go back and access that information. So thank you all. We're quiet, Dr. Gant. Thank you, Cabinet. I'm going to excuse them because if you all didn't realize, some of them have been working since like 4 o'clock, monitoring trees down and power lines down. And so they are exhausted. So thank you, team. I appreciate each of you, and I'll stay on.
Thank you all. Thank you to the cabinet members as well. And thank you, Dr. Thomas. And I do want to reiterate, I know I've said this twice, please do not wait until board meetings to ask questions. Okay, we have a direct line, and I don't really know any other direct way to say it. There are going to be a lot of concerns shared over the next couple of weeks. There have been. There are going to be a lot of questions that we all have. I want to encourage you to reach out to Dr. Thomas by email, by phone, whatever way is most comfortable, and ask those questions and share those concerns, because those are the only way in real time that she can allow her team share that feedback with her team, and then they can determine if changes need to be made. This will be the case as well when we have our regular board meeting. I'm sure there'll be, you know, an update then, but I just want to encourage us to please reach out and use the communication, the access that we have to share those concerns, share those questions that stakeholders have or that we have. Okay. We'll move forward with our agenda items, and that is the transition to face-to-face board meetings. Wanted to dedicate a short amount of time to discussing how, when we'll return. I'll just share some ideas, but this is not, I'm more curious about what you all think. I know that not all of us are able to meet in person for a variety of different reasons. I also know that it is important for us to begin to transition back as well. And so I wanted to open the floor for what your thoughts are about us transitioning. Dr. Maddox and myself, as well as Ms. Palmer and Dr. Thomas, have talked some about what this could look like if we need to transition back with board members that can be there, and board members that can't call in like we did previously when board members could not make it, and use that method. Do we have public comments? Do we limit our public comments? Do we have public comments with people allowed to read their public comments and physically distance? All of these decisions, of course, have implications for what we'll need from staff. And so that's why we need to decide how we are going to do that. So the floor is open for any ideas.
Dr. Maddox, I'm sorry, Dr. Gann, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to go ahead and leave the meeting. I only leave home for the essentials, and I'm not going to attend any meeting, whether it's a small meeting, large meeting, or whatever. It's just in my mind, it's just too risky for me. So that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you, Mr. Worthy, for sharing. Others?
Can I speak? I was just going to say, I think my concern is how efficient our board meetings need to be through the end of the year, at least. And so I would be concerned trying to navigate a new style of board meeting in the next month while we're still dealing with the Cognia, the Cognia response. And so I think I would try to keep us in this mode for at least another month until we get through that, and then try to do, if we're going to do this split, I mean, the meetings are going to have to be split, which means we're going to have some people online and some people in person, and that's chaos. I mean, I'm trying to teach that way, and it's chaos. So we don't need chaos right now. We need a functioning, high efficiency board, and we've sort of got that right now. I get the pressure from the community, but I think our job is to be as efficient and effective as possible. And just going to a face-to-face meeting to look like we're responding to community concerns, I'm just not sure that that's a good enough motivation to sacrifice our potential efficiency.
I want to say that before the pandemic, there was a place in our policy, and we had people call in before, and I don't recall those meetings being chaos. The individuals that are not there physically, or at least it wasn't my experience, let me say that it was chaotic. I certainly do understand your point, though, Dr. Yeager, regarding efficiency.
I would just hazard that I think we put our staff under an extraordinary amount of stress in order to manage all of the things that they're having to deal with. And whatever is easier for them would be better. I hate having them sitting in that room for the entire meeting in the event that a question comes up for them to answer. I think even allowing them to be virtual or some kind of hybrid model would be very effective. And so we would have the option of being in person or coming in, but giving the staff the option to do the virtual, especially since they don't seem to have normal work days. They're running, nobody's doing less than a 12-hour day there. And so it would be amazing to be able to give them some kind of relief, and they don't have to at least do the commute to get home. So I think it would be great to be in person for people that want to be there, but for people who cannot be there, I think the virtual is going to be our way to go in the future.
I don't have a particular issue of going face to face. I mean, if it came down to we wanted some people to try face to face, I'm perfectly fine to do that. My concern is sort of like Dr. Yeager's concern. I know that when we had face-to-face meetings in the past and it was broadcast, a lot of times people had trouble hearing, either through the microphones or the audio wasn't very good. And so my concern is that if we're in person and we're wearing masks, I feel like it's actually going to be harder for the public to be able to hear what we're saying than it is when we're all on Zoom. So I don't know, that's a potential trade-off. So I don't know, I don't have a particularly strong feeling either way.
I know I'm not a board member, but I do have a couple of smaller government clients that are doing this mixed model. It is technologically difficult. I'm sure it could be overcome with enough resources, but it is difficult when you have the people who are physically present are looking at each other, but when you're on the Zoom virtually, you can't see all of them and vice versa. So, you know, I mean, with enough individual cameras and microphones, perhaps that could be overcome. But in my experience, it has been, these meetings are more relaxed for me than those, because I can see all of you and you can see all of you can all see me.
Thank you, Mr. Pruitt.
Yeah, I've been the one or two virtual members on a panel that's happening up in DC, and you're just not as engaged and not as included as you would be if you were there in the room. It gives bias to those who are not in the room. I mean, bias against those who are not in the room. So if it's Mr. Stevens and Mr. Worthy who have to sit away from the meeting, they're at a disadvantage to bring their concerns to the table. Here, we're all on equal footing.
Okay.
I've got.
Mr. Davis.
Yeah, I want to. I'm kind of a dual of two minds. I mean, from a personal standpoint, you know, and many of y'all already know this, but my son had DIC earlier in the spring and had amputations, and now in November he's having open heart surgery, and my wife and I are his primary caregivers. So I'm not even going out, you know, for any reason, at least until the operation and his recovery. So in terms of November, December, I'm definitely out of the equation. That's one set of mind. The other set of mind, though, as I'm looking at January, and you know, if we continue with our plans and we're going to be fully brick and mortar for all those, unless they are medically fragile, or unless the parents opt to keep their kids at home doing virtually. I almost feel like we have, you know, it's almost like lead by example too. And so you know, I feel like that from my standpoint, there's no way I can do it in November and December. Those 3 meetings, you can pull me out of the house. But when I start looking at January after my son's surgery and he's recovered and we're not his caregivers, I want to do it safely. I'm not sure what that looks like, but I do think, again, in terms of perception of the community, if we are declaring as board members that our buildings are safe, then I think we're going to need to do something in that direction. I don't know what it looks like, but, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but I'm speaking for myself as someone who can't do November, December, but would like to talk about what meeting face-to-face looks like in January.
Okay, and so what I think I hear from a good bit of people is that these next couple of months, November and December, the preference would be to stay virtual and use that time to create a plan to transition in person. I do agree to an extent with Mr. Davis. I don't think it's a matter of public pressure. I do think there's the expectation right now that people are in our buildings within the next couple of weeks. And while that won't be everyone, which is similar to the board, that won't be everyone that's able to come even after January. We probably have individuals that may need to opt out, or actually even after February or March. We really don't know what next semester and next summer looks like. I do think at some point we need to have a firm plan for how those of us that can transition will transition back. And I understand the other, concerns about not being able to hear the technology. And, those are opportunities for us to look at how we improve those areas as well. Because even if we're meeting in person, if we rewind a year ago when all of us were in person, we still had feedback that it was hard for individuals to hear us online. And so there may be some opportunities to improve some of the technology infrastructure we have to for our meetings anyway. But again, that's what I think I hear. We're holding off as a board until December or until later to make a plan.
What I heard was that we would probably, what I heard, I thought was that we're going to have at least 3 of the 9 members will not be participating in face-to-face meetings through the end of the year. And so it seems like it would make the most sense then to stay virtual. Also, 2 of those members will not be on the board in 2021. And so the natural transition would probably be January. But I agree with Greg and Tawana, who posted in chat. We do need to lead by example. And so if students are going back, then as early as is practicable, we should go back. And the sound quality has been a long-standing issue of mine. If we could find a way to run the sound through the board, through the soundboard, and have that go out, that would be ideal. I talked to Taylor about that a while back. I think it was something having to do with the camera technology that didn't allow that, but that would be great.
I think it would be good too if we just simply in person use our Zoom. We don't seem to have a problem with that, so we can be in person and on Zoom, and that should take care of that sound problem.
Yeah, I also think in terms of, I've suggested that we put this in December's agenda, because I do think, like, for instance, I don't think all staff members should be required to be at the meetings. I think we can limit the numbers there. I think we need to talk about how we get public input. It may be that we do it a different way than we traditionally do it. I mean, I think we may need to take the space and totally rearrange it. And maybe we need some of those dividers that Dexter has. So, I mean, there are some things that we can do, but I think that would be a good topic for December's meeting, to make plans for that January and bring our new board members into these discussions, because we've got 3 new people that have not weighed in on this at all.
Yes, thank you for that reminder.
Another variable you'll be dealing with are the ever-changing executive orders from the governor's office. As we mentioned last time, he's gone from 30 days to 2-week intervals. The one in place now expires Saturday, so I presume we'll get something either tomorrow or Saturday updating that again. But what he allows us to require in our own facilities is always an issue when one expires.
And if I could just add in there, where I stand on this, as I said back when we were discussing going back to school in July, I believe this is a leadership thing, to where the option definitely needs to be left open there for those who don't want to attend in person. But if we have a November 9th start date, then I believe meetings should begin in person for those of us who do choose that option, just to show leadership and use these same health guidelines that we're asking our teachers and students to abide by. So.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. I agree. So it sounds like the consensus is this will be on our December agenda to talk about more as far as specific plans. That will also be an opportunity to include our board members elect. And we will be planning for January moving forward.
So will they take their oath of office in December or January?
January, from my understanding.
Yeah,
So this
typically.
is gonna be on.
Thank you for mentioning that. So yeah, typically incoming board members take their oath right before the work session in January. The clerk of court, Beverly Logan, has been coming to our meetings to administer the oath for the new members. But again, that sort of depends on where we are and how we're having that meeting. New members, I'll be in touch with all the new members between now and then. I don't think the paperwork is actually here yet, but at some point before or after December 31st, but before the first work session, it may be that each member just individually needs to go to Beverly's office and take the oath there. But we'll figure that out as we go along.
Great.
Okay.
And so in December, how does that change our dynamics from today? Are we just going to make sure that they're all present to weigh in on this decision, or?
I think so. I think that's the simplest way. If we'll be meeting virtually, then we can ask them, to try to attend. And if they can't, they can share feedback before then.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's up to, it's been just a service Beverly has offered to come and do that at once, but individual members are always free to go see Beverly individually and do it. So it's whatever's most convenient for each individual new board member.
So when's the earliest they can get sworn in?
I think I'm trying to remember, and I was dancing around whether you can take the oath before January 1. I actually think you can. The holdup is typically getting what's called a dedimus, which is just an archaic phrase from the Secretary of State's office that Beverly has to get before she can administer the oath.
Right.
I think they're able to share feedback. They sit in on policy meetings, so I don't think that should be an issue. We can simply ask them what they think about the plan, or do they have any thoughts towards the plan. I don't think whether they've been sworn in or not will be a determining factor.
Oh no, I misunderstood. No, of course not. I was just saying this. They can each decide the board doesn't have to decide when they take the oath. Each one can decide that.
Yeah, I was just trying to clarify when does someone's term, when's the earliest it can begin? And you're saying the earliest it can begin is January 1.
January 1.
Oh yeah, January 1 is when the term begins.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay.
So I'm just trying not to have to revisit it again unless it's going to be significantly different than where we are today. But that's the board.
If it's significantly different, we'll I think we would have possibly talked by then. But if it's not significantly different, then it won't take a lot of time when it's on our December agenda. And so I think we can I'm happy to send an email out to the board and ask for more thoughts about, or send that same survey out to the board to the board members elect that I sent out to the board, just so they can share any additional feedback as well. Okay. We will move forward if there are no additional comments or questions for that area. If there are additional questions and comments, just simply call a board member, send an email so that we can work through those. The next item is an action item, actually, 5.1, which is the approval of the purchase of student safety petitions. Dr. Thomas?
Okay, sorry about that. So Dr. Gant, we have made a request to purchase the items. As we've discussed today, we will continue looking into other devices to help with mitigation of spread, but the request is to approve the purchase of the partitions for students to utilize, primarily right now for K-5, but we do have sufficient devices for middle school if needed, if the teachers and principals decide they're needed. And part of that is just due to age and symptoms and ability to self-monitor some of those behaviors.
I move that we accept the recommendation of Dr. Thomas for the approval of the purchase of student safety partitions.
Second.
Okay, Ms. Davis made a motion to approve. Dr. Yeager provided the second. Any additional questions related to this purchase or this action item? Okay, Dr. Thomas, if you would take roll for all of those in favor of approving the purchase of student safety petitions.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Ms. Davis?
Yes.
Dr. Yeager?
Yes.
Dr. Dykeman?
Yes.
Mr. Worthy? Mr.
Sorry, he's already left.
I think he said
Okay.
he was going to leave the meeting after his last statement.
Okay, Dr. Gant?
Yes.
Dr. Knox?
Yes.
Dr. Maddox?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so that motion carries for the approval of the purchase of student safety petitions. We'll move forward with item 6, to item 6.1, which is adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Okay, I think I heard Dr. Thomas, no, Dr. Maddox make the motion, and Ms. Davis, maybe?
I
Make the
made the
second.
motion and Dr.
I'm sorry, Ms. Davis. I'm sorry, Ms. Davis.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so Ms. Davis made the motion to adjourn. Dr. Maddox provided the second. Seeing that there are no objections, we are adjourned at 9:09 p.m. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all very much. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Have a good evening.